All right, Randy, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a tremendous amount of unknown. Projections are the Ed Fund has this very significant deficit, upwards of $150 million or less. So, we're most districts at this point, you are in a very different situation than pretty much every other district in the state. So the challenges that you're going to face are going to be very different than what other districts are facing, because most budgets are paying for teachers and salaries and benefits. And so when you've got that significant reduction in funds coming in, it's going to impact what you can pay for. You are facing unknown move-ins, basically, right? Your biggest variable is the unknown about people coming in to claim residency and seek tuition reimbursement. So that's the unknown factor for you. That's a much bigger factor than what other operating districts are facing.
Randy, do you have a sense of how many people have called to inquire at the BRSU?
I don't have a sense of inquiry. If I was thinking that probably something I can offer you is, every 4 weeks or so, I could let you know what we've got as far as enrollment goes. We don't typically start seeing that until July, August. I think that all of the parameters that you put in place 2 years ago are going to help you, driver's license, homestead, all these requirements that are above and beyond for Winhall will help, because there will be people who are not prepared for that, nor are they necessarily willing to, and they're going to have to face that when they get here. So I think that's a worthwhile factor to see how that plays into the whole thing too.
Jen, one thing that may be helpful is if you would reach out to the schools and see what their interest level has been. I know from a personal standpoint, I had 4 families reach out to me today alone about moving.
Yeah, anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of families calling schools and a lot of people looking to move to the area.
And so my question is, originally we had kind of worked with the schools 2 years ago to establish quotas. And I'm curious if they're going to stick to those quotas or not. And so part of it is,
but we can't do anything. I mean, they can do it.
It's not that we can do anything, but we can work with them, because there was a quota that was established 2 years ago that was 48 students for Maple Street and so.
Right, but that's on them to uphold that.
100%. But I think that giving them some guidance during this time would be
not something that we would do as a board.
No, it's not something that we would do as a board, but it is something that we discussed last time.
Right, so if we're not going to do it as a board, then I don't think that we need to have a discussion about it.
But I do think we should do something as a board. There's so many families moving in, and I do think that something should be done, because if we don't do anything, our tax rate, we're going to be in a worse position next year than we've ever been from a.
So we can't do anything about enforcing quotas.
I'm not asking you to do anything about enforcing quotas. I'm asking you to have a discussion of what we can do.
Meredith, I think, maybe what would make sense, because, the schools are going to do what they're going to do. And certainly if families are choosing public schools, I mean, that's the end of the conversation. But I think what would be helpful is to remind people that we had a board meeting tonight, and to provide them, maybe Emily Schriebel can send out the link to tonight's meeting where we're discussing what's happening with our tax rate and the implications of having more people educating their students and, from Winhall than we had anticipated at town meeting. And I
also think a discussion of what happens when our tax rate goes up, and some of our historical precedent of that, our townspeople get very, very, very upset. And what tends to happen is that school choice becomes a very, very contentious debate. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is, understanding that we are limited, is to somehow mitigate that contentious debate, so we're not in the hot seat every 2 years like we have been historically.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is, I would not be surprised if our tax rate goes up because we have additional families moving in. But I also wouldn't be surprised if tax rates across Vermont go up because of the educational crisis and the shortage in the educational fund.
But
So,
also another thing that we could discuss is with the select board to understand that if all these families are moving in, it may be time to do a reappraisal of real estate.
Yeah, but we can't do that.
No,
They
I'm
can do
not
that.
saying that we can do it, Dean. I'm simply saying that anything that impacts the Winhall tax rate, which is, from my understanding, cost per actualized pupil is impacted by the value that's put on, on our real estate. That's one of the impacts. If we ask for, it's something we had discussed 2 years ago. So anything to mitigate our taxes from going up, I think would be welcomed and appreciated. I'm not saying it's within, I'm just trying to think a little bit outside of the box. So we don't have the same situation that we had 2 years ago, which was contentious and unpleasant for everybody. You pitted townsperson against townsperson. It was awful.
Anytime tax rates go up, you're going to have that. That's just going to happen. It's been happening here for, since as long as I've been here. So we can do everything we can to mitigate that. But, what we have to do is, I agree with you in the sense that we have to make sure that everyone is prepared for what's coming. We do still have $250,000 in the tax stabilization fund. So even if we do get an influx of unanticipated enrollment, that doesn't mean that the tax rate is necessarily going to go up drastically. I agree with Jen. I think it's probably going to go up, but I also agree with Jen that I think everyone's tax rates are going to go up. We are fortunate that we have a stabilization fund to help offset that. But I can tell you right now that people know what's coming. I mean, maybe not everyone, but I've had enough people come to me and say, do you know how many people are moving here and how much our enrollment's going to go up? And, preliminary, just from talking to Beth and, Tim and Robin Apps, I'm right now looking at at least 50 families that are thinking about it.
or 50 kids. I heard 50
I don't know
kids.
it might be 50 kids. Beth said that she thought she had handed out around 50 of the documents that people had requested in order to enroll. That's just hearsay, though. I don't know. She was just guessing.
Then the other question that I have is, I hear a lot of people are hedging. So they're going to apply to the school, they're going to pay the deposit, and if they open the schools in New York or New Jersey or wherever, they're going to pull them out. What happens if they get pulled out of our school? Are we then responsible for, and they don't,
We just pay every day that there's a child who's a child of a Winhall resident in a school. So if someone moves into the area November 13th, we start paying November 13th or 14th, 13th.
It's going to be the residency that is going to either
Yeah.
hopefully work to our favor, because if people are hedging their bets and they're not sure, they're probably not going to jump through all the hoops to establish residency properly, like filing a homestead, etc. In order to do that. So that might work to our advantage, but we can't know for sure how many of these people that are considering it are actually going to go through with it. But I think the important thing for us at this point is that we're just all aware of it. We're having a conversation about it, and we have a plan going forward to address, the voters if we need to, and say, listen, we're going to have a problem.
I think we can do more. Is what I'm saying is, I think that I understand that it's wonderful that we're all aware of it. I think it is definitely coming, but I think there may be more that we can do as a board to address the situation. And so I'd like to consider what some of those options may be.
But see, Meredith, we're constrained by the statute. There's not a whole lot of thinking outside the box of the statute that we can do. We can add additional documentation for residency. That's one thing we could do. That is within the statute. But do we, I mean, are you seeing a shortcoming in the paperwork that we currently have in place? I mean, is there an articulated?
I don't know. It was kind of a discussion that I wanted to have to make it a little bit harder for people. The conversation that I had today was disturbing because one of the families was like, well, we want to hedge, we want to move up there, but we don't really want to stay. And my problem is that there's several families that are contemplating moving up for a short period of time that are going to wreak havoc on our tax rate. And
I don't agree with that because you can only have one domicile at a time.